Chapter 1. Zarinca. The tent had gathered at the edge of the forest, where the soil was poor and the cold wind of late autumn blew. Old carts, covered with hemp tarpaulins, formed a wide circle, and in the middle a fire burned that crackled lazily. Barefoot children ran between the tents, while the women, in their long, colorful skirts, prepared polenta in black pots of smoke. The men sat together, on wooden logs, playing cards or mending cartwheels. Here lived Zarinca, a 17-year-old girl, with eyes as black as pitch, and long hair braided in two thick tails. She had the gift of song from her mother Savita. Whenever Zarinca's voice rose over the plain, people would stop their work and listen. Her melodies had something wild, something that stirred your blood and made your soul tremble. Zarinca's mother had also been famous in her youth. Savita knew how to read, she could write her name and a few words in Romanian, a rare thing in a country where few could even say their age. She had also sung in the villages of the plain at weddings and dances, but she had never had the courage to go far. "The world is bad with us, Zarinco," she would tell her, often, looking at her daughter with heavy eyes. "Here we are among our own, as poor as we are." But Zarinca wanted more. She felt her calling in her blood. She dreamed of big cities, of squares full of people, of lights that do not go out with the sun. She dreamed of singing on real stages, of wearing velvet dresses and of no longer sleeping under moth-eaten blankets. On a cold night, under a moonless sky, Zarinca made up her mind. She tied a few things in an old scarf, a pair of better slippers, a clean skirt and a silver coin that she had kept hidden for months. She was going to run away to Bucharest, the city about which she had heard fantastic stories from the merchants who used to pass by the stall. But she was not alone in her thoughts. Next to the fire on a sheepskin lay her younger sister Lumința, a 10-year-old girl, with eyes just as black and burning. Lumința had followed her that evening, had seen her preparing her bundle, and when everyone else had fallen asleep, she crept up next to her. "Do you want to go?" whispered the child, her voice trembling. Zarinca stopped tying. "Don't tell anyone, Lumința, that I swear." "I swear," the girl said with childish fear. "But, take me too." Zarinca looked at her tenderly and hugged her. "I can't, my child, it's a hard and dangerous road. What if our people or who knows what bad people catch me? You stay with your mother." The light was crying in small, muffled sobs. Zarinca stroked her hair until she fell asleep and then, with a heavy heart, she slipped away into the night. Her escape was like a breathless chase. She passed through the forest, avoiding the paths, listening to every rustle. From time to time, she stopped and listened. No screams, no footsteps of a pursuer. Only the wind whistling through the branches. The road to Bucharest was long. She walked for days, sometimes asking for a plate of food at scattered houses or seeking shelter in abandoned barns. On the way, she met all kinds of people, a cart with peasants going to the market, an old woman who gave her a loaf of bread, a lost soldier who asked her, smiling, if she didn't want to return home. But Zarinca clenched her fists and walked ahead. She dreamed of Bucharest. And in a twilight, when she was already walking on a wider road, bordered by thick dust and gravel, she caught sight of the city. It was the end of the 18th century. Bucharest unfolded before her like a dream. Large houses with porches, bustling inns, squares full of merchants and taverns from which the smell of wine and roast meat could be heard. Horse-drawn carts passed by at a gallop, and women in loose dresses and parasols laughed under decorated hats. Gentlemen with top hats and walking sticks walked leisurely, and beggars and sweepers mingled in the side streets. Zarinca had never seen so many people before. She felt small, weak, dusty, with a poor skirt and beaten-up shoes. But a proud heart beat in her chest. She stopped in a large square, where fiddlers were playing near the tables of a hahn. There, for the first time, Zarinca understood what she was going to do. She was going to sing. She was going to sing until people turned their eyes to her, until all of Bucharest knew her. She approached with timid steps, listening to the violins and the cymbals. With a sudden impulse, she raised her voice. An old song, of sorrow and longing, rose from her chest and floated over the crowd. Silence. Then, slowly, people began to gather. They looked in amazement at the poor girl who was singing with such a strong fire, with a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. An old fiddler, with long mustaches and shabby clothes, approached and beckoned to her. "Who are you, girl?" "Zarinca," she said, her heart in her throat. You sing as if you were crying with every limb, the old man laughed. Oh, you want to sing with us? At the inn near the royal court? Zarinca's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. That night, Zarinca slept for the first time in an inn room, on a soft mattress, with a real blanket. She dreamed of Lumința and Mother Savita, but especially she dreamed of the future that stretched out, endless and promising, in front of her. Because Zarinca, the tent girl, had set out to conquer the world. Chapter 2. The Inn at the Royal Court. Bucharest at the end of the 18th century was a lively city, full of contrasts. On the side streets, mud mixed with straw and dung, and carts creaked under the weight of goods brought from the countryside. And the slums around the royal court, small adobe houses were piled one on top of the other, separated only by shabby fences. Women washed clothes in the Dambovita riverbed, and merchants called out goods at their stalls since dawn. And the center, however, around the court, the world was more colorful and abundant. Here, large inns stood, with heavy oak gates, where travelers from all over the country stopped, landowner with shiny boots, Greek and Turkish merchants, young gentlemen in search of adventures. The streets were narrow, winding, but full of life. The smell of baked bread, the aromas of oriental spices, the thick steam of soups and mutton roasts. The inn where Zarinca had found shelter and voice was called La Stoa Denarii, but it was an old place, with white, vaulted walls, and a wooden porch, surrounding the wide courtyard, full of barrels and carts. Inside, the massive oak tables were always full, peasants in loose shirts, merchants with wide turbans and colorful dolmens, soldiers with decorated caps. Every evening began the same way. In a corner of the inn, the fiddlers sat on a podium, covered with mats. Zarinca was playing there now, alongside the 5 fiddlers who had welcomed her among them like a younger sister, although for some, their thoughts were more confused than that. The first. There was old man Kostek, the old man with milk-white mustaches, his violin creaking with emotion in the songs of mourning and vibrating with joy in the fiery choruses. He had been the first to call Zarinca to sing with them. Then there was Ali Dulcimer, a plump man, always with his shirt open on his chest and a thick laugh. He held the cymbal as an extension of his soul, beating rhythms that filled the inn with life. Dinu, the most sober of them, played the kobza. He was silent and sullen, with deep-set eyes under bushy eyebrows, but when his fingers touched the strings, a story was born without words. Pandili, the summery and agile boy, played the drum and the derelt. He was never serious. He made pranks and jokes, but he knew how to keep up the rhythm even when everyone was drunk. The last, and perhaps the most dangerous for Zarinca, was Matei, a young man of about 20, with black hair and brown eyes, shining with cunning and passion. He played the violin like a fallen angel. When he began to draw his bow over the strings, the women put aside their wine jugs, and the men frowned enviously. Soon as he had seen Zarinca, Matei had his eyes on her. He often smiled at her over the violin strings. He had slipped a dried flower into her neck scarf one evening, and sometimes he whispered sweet words to her, while the inn was buzzing with voices. Zarinca was afraid and happy for him at the same time. She knew well the power a man's gaze had over a girl alone in the world. But at the same time, her heart played in her chest like Matei's violin when she saw him approaching. Every evening, after the inn was closed, filled, Zarinca would get up and sing. Sometimes songs of longing, which brought tears to the eyes of the boyars and made the peasants sigh heavily. Sometimes songs of joy with fire and twang, which raised the world to the game. People would start clapping, the tables would empty and the glasses would clash, and every time, Matei would fix his bow and eyes on her, making her blush and sing even more brightly. At the Danube Star had gradually become Zarinca's home. The mistress of the inn, a fat and wise woman named Tonta, had fallen in love with her and taken her under her wing, protecting her from the evils of the city. Zarinca slept in a small room on the first floor, with a crooked window that looked out onto the courtyard. In the evening, she would fall asleep to the sound of cart wheels and the songs of the slops that dripped from the inn tables. But Bucharest was a dangerous city for a lonely girl, even with a voice like hers. Soulless people lurked in the back streets, and the city's sparkling promises often hid traps. One evening, after he finished singing, Matei came closer than usual to lean towards her, with that sly smile. "What do you say, pussy? You don't belong here among stupid and drunk people. With me, we would go to boyar courts, you would sing in front of gentlemen. You would wear silk dresses." His words were sweet, like honey on the tongue, but a shadow of fear flickered in Zarinca's eyes. She too dreamed of silk dresses, of boyar courts. But she knew that every dream had a price. He smiled at her slightly and pulled back. "It's not time yet, Matej," she whispered. The young man laughed briefly and tipped his hat. "As you wish, pussy. But I'll wait for you." Zarinca remained looking after him, while Matej disappeared among the noisy tables. In her heart, a question was struggling. Will this city bring her dreams to fruition? Or will it swallow her, like so many others, in its mud and whirlpool? At night, looking out the crooked window of her little room, Zarinca clenched her fists, the scarf in which she kept the dried flour from Matej, and whispered, "I did not run away from the tent to be sold to another master. I will sing. And I will be free." Chapter 3. The Song and the Traps. Zarinca's days at the Danube Star Inn had become increasingly hectic. The news of the girl with the golden voice had reached far and wide, especially in the homes of the wealthy. Boyars in expensive clothes and ladies with velvet fans sometimes came down to the inn, just to listen to her. They smiled at her, left heavy gold coins on the wine glass, and looked at her as if she were a treasure to be conquered. At first, Zarinca did not know what to do with the attention of men. She was ashamed, blushing at every long look or bold compliment. Raised among the poor tents of the camp, she knew what it meant to be looked at with lust. Her mother had taught her, with tears in her eyes, that a woman's freedom could be lost in a moment of weakness. "To guard your soul and body as your greatest treasure," she told her. The old woman had said one night, by the crackling fire, and Zarinca listened. Until then, no man had even touched her skin with the tip of a finger. Soon, however, greater temptations began to come. Some were elderly boyars, dressed in heavy robes, with round bellies and heavy rings on their fingers. They beckoned to her from the threshold of the inn, called her to their tables, and promised her silk dresses, gold chains, even a little house on the outskirts of the city. But when Zarinca met their blurry eyes and flabby cheeks, her heart clenched with disgust. Others, younger, with burning eyes and ruddy cheeks, looked at her with a poor lust. Handsome young men, with clean shirts and the looks of hungry dogs. They promised eternal love, songs under the windows, and stolen kisses. But they had neither land nor money. Only dream promises. Among these courtiers appeared the boyar Stanciu, a man of about 50 years old, with a black mustache and palms as wide as shovels. He was the one who first offered her the chance to sing in large houses. One evening, after the applause died down and the noise of the inn began to disperse, Stanciu approached her and said, "My girl, it's a shame for your voice to die out here, among drunks and trash. People of quality come to my court. You will sing in fragrant rooms, not in smoke-filled halls." Zarinca felt her heart racing to sing in boyar houses. It was the dream that had made her run away from the tent. But he also knew that nothing is free. He looked at the boyar for a long time, with the eyes of a scared child, but his voice remained determined. "If you want me for my voice, I will come. But my body is not for sale." The boyar laughed thickly, with a trace of astonishment. "That's it for now, singing fairy. We'll see later. The world is big and times are hard." That's how Zarinca began to sing in large salons, under crystal chandeliers, among ladies in silk dresses and gentlemen in tailcoats. When she opened her voice, silence fell around. Even the most arrogant boyars forgot about boredom, and the ladies broke their fans, jealously watching their men startle at every note. But behind the lights, other dangers lurked. One night, after a long feast in the house of an old back, Stanciu discreetly pulled her aside. "It's time for you to be rewarded as you should, singing fairy." And he handed her a small velvet box, in it, a thin gold chain with a heart-shaped pendant. "A sign that you are mine," he whispered. Zarinca felt the blood rising to her cheeks. She did not touch him. She raised her eyes to the boyar and, with a dignity rarely seen in a poor girl, said, "Neither my singing nor my freedom can be bought." She turned her back and left, leaving behind a whole world of shocked looks and indignant murmurs. But her refusal did not go unpunished, and in the days that followed, she felt the doors closing. Some boyars who had received her with open arms now turned their backs on her. The ladies looked at her coldly, and the dice and whispers about the naughty gypsy went from mouth to mouth. Back at the inn, life was also becoming harder. The rich client sent word to stop Zarinca from singing, and Tonta, the mistress, wrung her hands care. But Zarinca, with all the fear in her chest, said to herself, "Better poor and free than rich and enslaved." Meanwhile Matej, the fiddler with the shining eyes, had not lost hope. He saw how Zarinca fought alone against the city, and every evening, when they sat down to sing, he smiled at her with a different warmth, one less cunning, closer to the truth. One night, when everyone else had fallen asleep, Matej slipped onto the porch and knocked softly on Zarinca's door. "Zarinca, little pussy, open." She remained in the doorway, with the white handkerchief in her hand. "What do you want, Matej?" The young man spoke to her with unexpected sincerity. "I want to be your support, not your master." Zarinca looked at him for a long time, feeling something warm, but dangerous, nestling in her heart. The city was a whirlwind of traps, but maybe she didn't have to face it all alone. In the days that followed, Zarinca and Matej looked at each other like two prisoners in the same dungeon. At the Danube Star Inn had become a cage for both of them. For her, a dungeon of venomous words and lustful glances. For him, a world of torment in which he had to drown his longing in joyful songs. On a rainy evening, when the inn had emptied of people and the streets were full of mud and darkness, Matej motioned for Zarinca to go out onto the back porch. They wrapped themselves in a thin shawl and stepped into the night. "Are you sure?" Matej asked in a whispered voice, almost inaudible under the caress of the rain. "Yes," Zarinca answered without blinking. "I have nothing here, no future, no song. Only traps." Matej took a tightly tied bundle from under his wet shirt. "I put everything I have here, 2 changes, a few pennies, an old whistle and my heart, if you want to take it with you." Zarinca smiled sadly. She couldn't allow herself dreams of love now, not when danger was blowing in her neck at every step. But deep down, she valued this gesture more than all the boyar's chains. Their plan was insanely simple. They would flee before the roosters crowed, stealthily, through side streets, to the edge of the city. From there, they would look for a tent of wandering gypsies. Or maybe a fair where no one knew them, a new life, far from the boyars, from betrayals, from the city's traps. On the fateful night, Zarinca didn't sleep at all. She sat on the edge of the bed, her shawl tightly wrapped around her chest, listening to the rain hitting the roof tiles, and her mother's words echoed in her mind. "No one gives you freedom. You take it away." In the middle of the night, someone gently tapped on the window shutter. It was Matej. He seemed like a shadow between 2 lantern lights. Zarinca threw her bundle over her shoulder and, without looking back, quietly went down the stairs. The inn was sleeping, with all its sins immersed in the fumes of brandy. They both went out into the night. The streets were deserted, only here and there a hungry dog barking from an ajar gate. Zarinca held her skirt tightly in one hand, so as not to get dirty from the heavy mud. Matej walked forward, with a determined step, but attentive to every rustle, to every shadow. They had to pass by the cattle market, then take the dusty road to the slum. "If we reach the abandoned mill, we are saved," Matej whispered, without turning his head. But the road would not be so easy. To the corner of an alley, an overturned cart blocked their passage. And next to it, like waiting wolves, 3 men with hats pulled low over their eyes. Zarinca stopped suddenly. She recognized them, Stanciu's servants. Matej gripped the handle of the whistle like a weapon. "Stay behind me," he whispered. He took a step forward, ready to face them. But the men were not going to let them pass. "Where are you going, brave man?" growled one, a man with teeth as yellow as old straw. "It's none of your business," Matej replied curtly. "Yes, when you run away with our landowner's goods," chuckled another, looking at Zarinca with lust. Zarinca felt an icy shiver down her spine. The goods, that's how they saw her, not as a man, but as prey. In an instant, Matej jumped on the nearest man and hit him in the temple with the whistle. The man fell into the mud with a short groan. The other 2 rushed at him. "Run!" shouted Matej. Zarinca ran, her heart pounding in her chest. Her skirt caught on the stones, her feet slipped in the mud, but she didn't stop. She didn't dare look back. She had to get to the mill. That's where Matej had promised she would find her. After running for what seemed like an eternity, she arrived in front of the abandoned mill. The huge wheel hung motionless over the brook that gurgled below it. The air smelled of wet leaves and mold. Zarinca fell to her knees, panting, and tightened her shawl around her shoulders. She looked out into the night, waiting. Matej was late. For a moment, she feared she had lost him forever. But then, from the shadow of the trees, she appeared limping, with a bleeding wound on her forehead, but with a tired smile on her lips. "I told you I would find you, singing fairy," he whispered. And under the cold stars of an autumn night, Zarinca understood that, although the whole world had hunted them, the two of them had found something more precious than the landowner gold: freedom together. For 3 days and 3 nights, Zarinca and Matej traveled, hiding on dirt paths, through dense forests and through poor villages where no one asked questions. They slept under the open sky, ate what they could find: a piece of dried cheese, a handful of nuts that had fallen on the road. It was not an easy life, but freedom had a sweet taste, like wine stolen from under the landowner noses. On the morning of the 4th day, the horizon opened up and a large market appeared in front of them, set in a valley, next to a clear river. The houses were small, with clay walls and thatched roofs. Straw gathered around a muddy market. Above them, an old church looked out over the world like a worried mother. "Here," said Matej, "here we can start over." The fair was full of people of all races. Peasants brought to sell wheat and wine, craftsmen with colorful goods, noisy shopkeepers offering hand-woven carpets and towels. The air smelled of warm bread, smoke and sweat. Matej quickly found work for an old blacksmith, who liked that the boy could play the whistle while he hammered horseshoes. Zarinca, with her clear voice, wandered around the square and was quickly noticed by a fat innkeeper who needed someone to help at her dusty inn, the White Stag Inn. "It's not an easy job, child," the innkeeper had told her, wiping her hands on her dirty apron. "But if you know how to sing and make people happy, maybe you'll make a little extra money." Zarinca nodded. It was better than singing for the clad boyars of Bucharest. And the evening, after the inn was filled with pipe smoke and loud laughter, Zarinca would climb onto a small improvised stage and start singing. Old camp songs, songs of longing, songs of lost love. Her voice pierced the thick air, and for a moment, everyone gathered: peasants, merchants, travelers, forgot about their worries. Matej watched her from afar, his eyes full of light. He fell in love with her every evening anew, as if he had seen her for the first time. Zarinca no longer called her name. When someone asked her, she would simply answer, "I am Zarina." She had left behind the tent, the gypsy name, her past as a runaway girl. Here, in the market of the nameless, there was only a beautiful voice that brought comfort to those tired of the journey. But even here, danger lurked. Late one evening, when the inn was almost empty, a traveler from Bucharest drank too much and, hearing her singing an old slum song, stared at her for a long time. "I know you, girl," he said slowly, with a crooked smile. Zarinca clasped her hands in her lap. Matej, who was sitting in a dark corner, instinctively reached for the old whistle he always carried. "No. You don't know me," Zarinca answered calmly, although her heart was pounding in her chest. The traveler laughed heartily. "Yes, a gypsy girl who sang at the Danube Star Inn. Landowner Staniu is looking for you. He has a heavy price on your head." A wave of cold gripped her. That night, when all the lights in the inn went out and everyone fell asleep, Matej and Zarinca met behind the barn. "We have to leave again," she whispered. "We can't stay. If the news reaches the townspeople, they'll sell us for a few gold coins." Matej sighed deeply. He knew they couldn't run forever. But her determined gaze told him they had no choice. "Where should we go?" he asked. "Somewhere where even the songs wouldn't betray me anymore," Zarinca replied. "Somewhere where the world was too big and too busy to remember a girl with burning eyes and a golden voice." And so, before the sun rose over the valley, 2 young men left the nameless market, their small steps getting lost in the dust of the road. In their hearts, they carried forward not only the desire for freedom, but also the promise that, somewhere, the world would allow them a new beginning. Chapter 4. The City of Beasts. The road was long and full of hardships. The wind burned their cheeks, the rain chilled them to the bone, but hope kept their steps alive. After another 7 days of walking, through bare hills and silent forests, a real city finally appeared on the horizon, a city of high walls, with stone towers, red roofs and gates guarded by armed guards. "Here it is," whispered Matej, with a mixture of amazement and fear. "The City of Beasts, as the people from the nearby villages call it." "Why do they call it that?" asked Zarinca, pulling her shawl over her shoulders. "Because here people no longer have faces, but masks. They smile, but they keep their knife ready under their coat." Zarinca bites her lips. But they had no other choice. In big cities, the chances of remaining unknown were better than in small villages where every foreign face caught your eye. The city was bustling with life. Merchants shouted from stalls full of fruit and spices. The streets were narrow, paved with damp stone. and from the windows of wooden and brick houses poured songs, laughter and mixed smells of stew, wine, wet leather. Mattei found shelter in a dilapidated guest house, at the Black Raven, where the innkeeper was too drunk to ask too many questions. But Zarinca needed something more than a dirty bed and a piece of bread. She needed a place to sing again. One evening, dressed in a simple blue wool dress and with her hair braided as her mother had taught her in the tent, Zarinca knocked on the door of a famous tavern in the city, at the Black Raven. The Silver Hawk. The owner of the tavern was a cunning woman, with marten eyes and fingers full of rings. "Can you sing, girl?" she asked, measuring her from head to toe. "I know, ma'am. And I can get people to drink and pay." The woman laughed shortly. "Words are cheap here. Let me see you." Zarinca began to sing, and in a few moments, even the noisiest tables fell silent. There was something in her voice, a sweet bitterness, like good wine mixed with tears. When she finished, the owner nodded to her. "You can sing here. But remember, my girl, in this city, friendship is sold dearly, and freedom is only for those who know how to pay the price." Zarinca nodded. She had already understood the lesson. Time passed. Mattei worked in a carpentry workshop, and Zarinca sang every night at the Silver Falcon. People came to listen to her, merchants with bags full of gold, robbers disguised as gentlemen in capes, tired soldiers, whores with cheeks red from wine. But with each song, the danger grew. People began to ask, "Who is this girl? Where does she come from?" And one evening, among the guests, Zarinca spotted him. A tall man in a black cloak, who was looking at her too carefully, too insistently. He seemed to be listening not only to her voice, but also to the secret hidden in her heart. "Mattei," she whispered one night, when the boy was waiting for her at the street corner, "we have to leave again. Zarinca, we have barely settled down. We have a few pennies, a roof. It's not safe, I can feel it. There are eyes looking for us." Mattei sighed and lowered his gaze. "Wherever we go, we can't run forever." "We are not running away, Mattei. We are looking for a place where the world does not have time to ask who you are." They looked at each other in the dark, under a moon like a thin sword. They both knew, the city lured them with false promises and, just as easily, could swallow them without a trace. The next day, before the roosters crowed, Zarinca and Mattei left the city of beasts behind. They carried with them only a small bag with a few coins, a cherry wood whistle and a memory that true freedom is not sung at tables full of wine, but is lived step by step, moment by moment, on the uncertain path of dreamers. In front of them, the world was big, foreign and merciless, but also full of hope. And somewhere beyond the horizon, there may be a home for them too. The wind cut their cheeks like a sharp knife, and their tattered boots could no longer withstand the cold. Zarinca and Mattei, tired to the core, knew that if they didn't find shelter that night, they wouldn't see dawn again. On the side of a narrow road, between frozen fields and black puddles, they spotted a small house, tilted by years and storms. The pale light of a lamp flickered in a broken window. They approached with fear, but also with the last spark of hope. Mattei knocked softly on the door. "Who's there?" A hoarse voice rang out from inside. "Travelers, mother, troubled people. We only ask for a night of shelter," said Mattei. After a moment of silence, the latch creaked and an old woman appeared in the doorway. Small in stature, hunched like a dry branch, she wore a scarf the color of storm clouds and had sparkling eyes, as if she hid an entire forest of secrets in them. "Come in," she said. "But you should know, under my roof you pay not with gold, but with stories." The house was cramped, with smoked beams and walls full of icons and dried herbs. The old woman handed them a thick lentil soup and a rough blanket. "Now tell me, where do you come from and where are you going?" Zarinca and Mattei told a brief story. About the poor village, about fleeing to Bucharest, about their dream of freedom. Baba listened to them with narrowed eyes, nodding his head. "You won't find what you're looking for here. This country is sick with poverty and cunning. If you want to live differently, you have to cross the high water." "Water?" asked Zarinca, confused. "The Danube, dear girl," the old woman hissed, approaching them. "You cross it by ferry, secretly, across the border. And then take the high road, to Paris. There luck is not trampled underfoot. Anyone with a pure voice and heart can reach it." "Paris," whispered Mattei, as if he had uttered the name of a spell. "I know the right people," added the old woman. But for that you have to have cold blood and quick feet. All night, the old woman taught him the roads and signs, how to recognize the old ferry that was clandestinely taking people across the Danube. What words to say, when to leave, when to be quiet. They drew a kind of map on a goatskin with knots and arrows, each marking a landmark, a willow, a bend in the river. Dawn. When the fog rolled over the fields, the old woman walked them to the gate. Remember, Paris is not a fairy tale. It is hard. But it is the only place where dreamers like you can live. Otherwise, this world will crush you under your heels. They wrapped each of them a bracelet woven from red and black hemp threads. For luck. And as a reminder. Zarinca tightened the bracelet on her wrist and, for the first time in a long time, she felt that indeed somewhere, beyond everything, her fate was not yet decided. That the world was bigger than all the pain she had experienced until then. "Matej," she said, looking ahead with clear eyes. Come on, he replied. And so they set off with hasty steps, towards the Danube, towards an unknown world, with hearts full of fear and hope, a hope that, for the first time, seemed to be able to overcome all storms. Chapter 5. The Big Water. That night, when the moon was barely blinking through thick clouds, Zarinca and Matej reached the edge of the Danube. The river was dark and heavy, advancing in deep lazy waves, like a sleeping dragon to the end of a hidden path. Among the tangled willows, the ferry awaited them, a large wooden raft, tied with thick ropes and maneuvered by two silent men. They seemed like shadows, with furrowed faces and sharp eyes like knives. Matej made the sign he had learned from his grandmother. 3 knocks on the wood of the mast point. One of the men looked at them for a few moments, then motioned for them to climb aboard. "Pay now," the man hissed, his voice harsh. Matej took out the small bag from his belt and handed him a few gold coins. The man weighed them in his palm, then hid them without another word. The raft broke away from the shore with a long creak. Zarinca crouched next to Matej, her shawl pulled over her shoulders. The wind brought the smell of mud, fish and danger, and the middle of the water, where the waves were spinning madly. The raft was shaken violently. A shout rang out from the shore. A patrol of border guards, with lanterns and dogs. "Faster," whispered Matej. The raft's men began to row hard, while the dogs barked and the guards shouted orders into the night. Bullets whistled over the water, one ricocheting off the wet raft. Zarinca dug her nails into Matej's arm, trembling. "Hold on tight, girl," one of the raft's men roared. In a few moments that seemed like hours, they managed to reach the other shore. The raft's men pushed them to the shore and, without a word, turned the raft back, disappearing into the fog. Zarinca and Matej ran on their knees through the reeds, until the barking and footsteps of their pursuers could no longer be heard. They collapsed at the edge of a deserted field, under a lonely oak tree. "We escaped," Zarinca whispered, her eyes full of tears. "We crossed the Danube, beautiful girl, and no one can stop us now," smiled Matej, tired but full of fire. They looked at the grey sky, like a promise of a new beginning. The next few days were hard. They had to avoid villages, avoid the beaten paths, share their dry bread stingily. They walked more at night, when the fields were immersed in silence and only the owls were watching, a fair on the edge of the Austro-Hungarian border. They were forced to change their clothes. Matej sold his knife crafted by a carpenter for 2 woolen coats and a patch of food, with more ordinary clothes and with stories ready-made, like they were brother and sister from a village burned by war. They managed to move on, fooling the customs officers where they would otherwise have perished. In a shabby inn, on the edge of a dark forest, they heard news about the road. "Paris," laughed the innkeeper, with a mocking mask on his face. "Many people go there, because they hear there are jobs and bags of gold. But the road is long and not for the faint of heart." "How long?" asked Matej, frowning. 3 months, maybe 4 on foot. Through mountains, through forests, through foreign cities. And at every step, another danger. Zarinca felt her heart tighten. 3 months of uncertainty, hunger, cold. But deep in her soul, something stronger than fear ignited, desire. The desire to live differently, to sing on big stages, not in dusty pubs. "Let's go," she said, looking deep into Matej's eyes. "We're going," he replied without hesitation. The next dawn, under a pinkish sky of late spring, they left the inn and set off towards the sunset, with determined steps. Their journey to Paris had just begun. And in their souls, a new melody was already playing, a melody about freedom. The road to Paris was an endless snake of muddy paths, dense forests and villages where the language seemed to be torn from another world. Zarinca and Matej walked from dawn until midnight, eating little, sleeping in abandoned barns or under trees, with thin blankets pulled over their tired bodies, and the third week of their journey, they arrived at a suburban fair near Vienna. The city seemed to be in celebration. Flags, stalls, fiddlers. People were laughing, dancing, candy canes were spinning in the air, and sausages were sizzling on the stoves. "Let's stay a night," said Matej. "We can sing, save some money. Look, we managed to get through this much. We deserve a moment of rest." Zarinca smiled. Although her eyes burned with fatigue, her soul longed for music. The people gathered, enchanted. Zarinca's voice was like warm honey flowing over their hearts. Slowly, the hat placed in front of them filled with coins. A merchant even handed them a fresh loaf of bread and 2 apples. But among the gathered smiles, 2 gazes followed with interest more than the song. "They are beautiful and stupid," laughed one of them, while sipping from a jug of brandy. "They're just so good at fooling. They sing with a golden voice. Boy, in Paris they'd break the world. And their wallets too." The 2 were known as Luca and the Baron, 2 swindlers who made money by luring people to follow them with promises of safe passage to the west, for a small fee of trust. And the evening, when the fair had quieted down, Luca approached them with a jovial air. "You sing beautifully, Gypsy," he said. "You'd make my mother cry. But really, don't you 2 want to shorten the way to Paris? I know someone who can take you by cart, quickly, along a safe road. Not on foot, not through the mountains. It costs money, but it saves you a lot of suffering." Matej and Zarinca looked at each other. Tempting. Their legs ached, their food had dwindled, and the dream of Paris seemed far away. "How much?" Matej asked cautiously. 100 crowns. But half now, the rest at the border. Think about it, you don't walk for 3 months, walk for 3 days. That evening was full of worries. Zarinca felt that something was wrong, but fatigue had dulled their instincts. "What if they're tricking us?" she whispered. "We have nothing to lose. If they're lying, we'll run. We're fast on foot," Matej replied. The next morning, having barely paid the 50 crowns they had collected from singing and selling a brooch of Zarinca's, they climbed into a cart covered with thick cloth, driven by the Baron. Seeing the wheels creaking on the road, Luca winked at them. "Good morning, my dears. See you in Paris." But after 2 hours of walking, Matej noticed that they were no longer passing through villages, but through an increasingly dense forest. "Where are you taking us?" he asked. The Baron grinned. "Fortunately, boy." The next moment, the cart suddenly stopped, and 3 men emerged from the thicket, armed with knives. Matej jumped out and tried to hit one of them, but was caught and knocked to the ground. "Give me the rest of the money," one shouted. "We don't have it," Zarinca roared. "You're lying, do it. We'll even cut it out of your throat if we have to." Zarinca felt a terrible rage. He took out the small knife he was cutting bread with from his chest and stuck it into the arm of the closest one. His scream scared the horses, which jerked, and in the stampede, Matej managed to escape from his grip and drag one of them into the mud. "Run, Zarinca," he shouted. She ran, her thighs burning, her heart pounding. Matej was immediately behind her, slightly wounded, but alive. They threw themselves into a cold stream, to lose track of each other, and crawled to a deep clearing, where they fell exhausted. "They took everything from us," she whispered, looking at her empty hands. "Not everything," Matej said, looking into her eyes. "They took our gold, but not the road. Paris is still there. And your voice," he added. "I can't steal that." Zarinca smiled, her tears mixed with the mud. "Then let's move on. We're going." And they set off again on foot, wiser, quieter, but with their dream untouched. The cold at dawn that morning seemed milder than any frost in Eastern Europe. When the train's wheels puffed on the last segment of the railway and the Paris station appeared to them in the milky moonlight, Zarinca and Matej were speechless. It wasn't the dream from the stories. It was dirty, noisy, smelled of burnt oil and smoke, but it was Paris. The real Paris. They got off with an old suitcase and 2 thin coats. Almost fluttering among the hurried steps of the French, a large wrought iron sign read, "Gare de Lyon." And no one asked them who they were or where they came from. "Here. Nobody knows anything," said Matej, fascinated. "Or maybe that's why everyone feels free," Zarinca replied. tightening her red scarf around her neck. For a few days they wandered around the Latin Quarter, sleeping in cheap shelters or in the waiting rooms of the train station. They ate little, a warm baguette split in two, sometimes an apple stolen from a stall. But Zarinca had a joy in her soul that had not faded since crossing the border point one evening. In front of a café on Rue de la Huchette, she saw an old man in a shabby tailcoat conducting three young musicians. They had no voice, but they had instruments, and the noise attracted people. Zarinca could not resist any longer. She approached them and, with sincere modesty, asked permission to sing a single song. The old man looked at her for a long time, then motioned for her to climb onto a box. When her voice vibrated for the first time on the streets of Paris, people stopped. They did not understand the words, gypsy, some of which she had invented herself, but the tone, the pain, the hope, and the love in them went beyond language. A man in a black hat, tall and thin, took out his notebook and wrote something down. He was an impresario. He worked for a small cabaret in Montmartre. "What is your name, young lady?" he asked after the song was over. "Zarinca. Have you sung on stage before?" "No. Only on the roads. Through villages. Through hearts," he smiled. "Come tomorrow night. Cabaret Le Papillon Bleu, no promises, just an audition. But your voice is not from the street." Zarinca didn't understand everything he had said to her, but she felt in his eyes something she had only encountered in her mother's gaze, recognition. Her voice was a gift. The next evening, the cabaret was a nest of smoke and strong perfumes. Women with lined eyes, men in black suits, glasses raised to the ceiling. On the stage, a weak lamp and a piano. Zarinca sang first trembling, then growing. She told with her voice a life of journey, of love, of pain and hope. To the end, there was no whistle, no laughter, but only applause. Sincere, long, heavy as a promise. That night, Mattei was waiting for her outside. He had not gone on stage with her. He did not want the spotlight. He just wanted to be the shoulder she could lean on when she got tired. When she left the cabaret, she smiled with moist eyes. "They called us tomorrow too. And the day after tomorrow they'll give us a room. And food. Mattei, are we done?" He hugged her. "We have a beginning. The rest, we'll build together." And in the heart of Paris, between dream and reality, Zarinca became the voice of the streets, of the village, of the mother who didn't have the courage to leave. She was the gypsy who didn't betray her blood, but fulfilled her dream. Chapter 6. In a New World. Paris had changed, and Zarinca, although still young, had become an unmissable presence. The cabaret Le Papillon Bleu was now hers, and not just because she sang on that stage, but because it belonged to her through her essence. Her voice, strong and clear, penetrated deep into the souls of those who listened to her, and each note seemed to cut the air with a precision that made time stand still. Now, she was almost 19 years old. Zarinca had become a woman in the true sense of the word, but also an enigma. To many. She was more beautiful, prouder, and in her eyes you could read a certainty that was difficult to achieve, a power that few women had at her age. Her hair, once simply braided, now flowed in silk waves that shone with every movement, and her dresses, of refined elegance, made her resemble a goddess of the streets. Mattei, next to her, was becoming more and more a protective shadow, a discreet but constant presence. He was no longer the young dreamer who had followed her with hopeless hope on the roads beaten by rain and fatigue. He was now a man who understood that love, in its essence, is not measured in words or touches, but in small gestures, in silences full of trust. Zarinca had never let love get lost in physical attraction, so mother had taught her. True love is like a song. It remains in your heart, even when you stop singing. Mattei understood Zarinca better than anyone. He needed nothing more than to be close to her, and his desires to touch her had been replaced by deep respect for her dream and for the dignity with which she lived her life. On a beautiful spring morning, Zarinca and Mattei they were riding through Paris in an elegant carriage. The carriage shone in the sunlight, and the yellow horses seemed to be walking on a golden road, with a light noise of wheels on the cobblestone streets of the capital. Zarinca looked with wide, bright eyes at the city that had given her so much and, at the same time, so little. "Do you think we will stay here forever?" she asked, raising her gaze to the blue sky. Mattei smiled. "I would like to, but Paris is a city that does not let itself be easily captured. Maybe some of us will leave, but you will stay. People love you here, Zarinca. You sang for them from the heart, and your heart is now in this city. Maybe, But I don't think I'll stay just because people love me. I've always dreamed of more than that. Paris is a dream, Mathé. But I don't want to be just a dream, I want to be real, I want to be me. The Le Papillon Bleu Cabaret had become one of the most sought-after destinations in Paris, and Zarinca, with each song she sang, strengthened her position. Each note she played brought not only applause, but also a wave of love that lifted her up, but which, at the same time, put her in front of a difficult choice. Although she earned a lot of money and had reached a fame that lifted her far above what she would have dreamed of in her native village, she felt that something was missing. She looked at the luxurious life that was offered to her and felt a mixture of fulfillment and emptiness. People loved her for what was on stage, but she knew that in her heart, another world lurking. One summer evening, at the end of a show, a young man approached Zarinca with a large bouquet of white flowers. It was an artist, a famous painter from the capital, who wanted to paint her for an exhibition, smiled with a refined, alluring air. "You are perfect," he said, in a mixture of admiration and desire. "I want to capture your essence, to make you immortal." Zarinca looked at him with a deep gaze, understanding that he did not really see her. He saw her only as an object of desire, not as a being with a complex story. Others had seen her before him. "Thank you, but I'm not interested in a painting. I don't want to be a portrait. I want to be a woman, with a life, with a choice." She threw her head back and walked out of the cabaret, with determined steps. Mathé was waiting for her outside, as usual. "Is everything okay?" he asked her. Zarinca smiled. "Yes, but people want to make me an image, not a person. And I'm not just an image, I'm a woman, Mathé. And you will remain that woman, no matter how much they ask of you. I want you as you are. And I love you for that, for your choice to be free." Zarinca felt a warmth in her soul, but also a restlessness. It was a price she was paying, and for the first time, she was beginning to understand how hard it was to be truly free in a world that wanted to possess you. But in those moments of restlessness, she felt that, in addition to all the choices that arose, she was finally the mistress of her own life. Not men, not fame, not money, but her choices were what defined her. She had learned from her mother, she didn't need a man to make her complete. Zarinca realized that she had built her own freedom, and that was what mattered. Paris was swallowing her whole, but she knew that, despite all the attempts to change her, she was still Zarinca from the poor village. And that's how she wanted to stay. Zarinca woke up in the morning with a new sense of stability, almost unbelievable for a girl who had been raised in poverty and who had fled a life of need. For several years, Paris had become her home. She no longer lived in uncertainty. She no longer lacked for anything. After winning a special place in the cabaret Le Papillon Bleu, her life seemed like a fairy tale. But something more profound had changed, and not only in the way others perceived her, but also in the way she perceived herself. On a cool autumn day, Zarinca received news that the owner of the cabaret, a Frenchwoman named Madeleine Dufresne, wanted to help her buy a house. Madeleine was a beautiful woman of rare elegance, about 40 years old. She was known in Parisian circles not only for her successful business but also for her captivating story. She had been a dancer at the Moulin Rouge before marrying a wealthy and influential Austrian, Otto von Kessler, an old and refined man, but who respected and loved her as his own daughter. First, everyone had said it was a marriage of convenience, but over time, Otto had loved her with a devotion that went beyond simple financial interests. Together, they had a luxurious villa near Paris. Madeleine loved Zarinca like a daughter and wanted to help her build a future away from the cabaret, to step out of the shadows of the stage. "You deserve more than just being a star on the stage, Zarinca," she had told her one evening, her eyes full of sincerity. With the help of her patroness in her own home, Zarinca had bought a modest but beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood of Paris, far from the hustle and bustle of the tourist-filled streets. A house with white walls, tall old wooden doors, and golden hardware. It had a small but charming garden, where vegetables and flowers were enveloped in sweet scents. And fortunately, the street was quiet enough for Zarinca to spend most of her time there. But despite the comfort and luxury she now had, Zarinca had never forgotten the path she had traveled to get here. As much as she longed for a normal life, a life away from the places where she sang and cried, she knew that the past would always follow her. Moreover, sometimes she still felt like a stranger in this world. Madeleine and Otto were always by her side. Every time Zarinca had a dilemma or didn't know which direction to choose, she thought of the advice of her Mrs. Dufresne, who often told her, "Every step you take counts, dear Zarinca." Never forget where you came from and what you have become. One evening, Madeline had invited Zarinca to the Moulin Rouge, the legendary club where dancers and artists displayed their talents in front of an enchanted audience. The atmosphere was electric, and the red and yellow lights penetrated through the heavy curtains, giving the room a mysterious air. The girls danced with energy, and the music was a combination of jazz and Parisian rhythms that made everyone clap their hands. Madeline looked at Zarinca, who was looking at the dancer with some melancholy. She had never done it, but she remembered the times when she wanted so much to be part of this world. Now, even though she had arrived there, she felt further and further away from that dream. "Why don't you dance too, Zarinca?" Madeline asked, smiling subtly. "I'm not that girl anymore, Madeline. I've grown up, and my life has been different. But I think I'd like to be here just as a spectator." Madeline looked at her with understanding. "I know you don't want to get involved with this world anymore. But know that sometimes, here in this place, there is a freedom that you can't find anywhere else." Zarinca felt bound by those words, but she knew she couldn't take a step back. She was a dancer once, but now she was building another life, one in which she didn't measure up to the lives of others. Madeline, having the experience of a person who lived on the edge, understood deeply. She whispered in her ear, without anyone hearing her, "Don't forget, Zarinca, that you are also part of the magic of this place. You didn't just become a star on stage, but also a strong woman who can decide what she wants from life." While the people of the Moulin Rouge continued their frenetic dancing, Zarinca and Mattei stood in a corner of the cabaret, observing in silence. Zarinca now understood that she could never escape her past, but she was learning to transform it into a part of what she had become. Although they had a beautiful house, and no longer lacked anything, there was still that little girl from a poor hut who had dreamed of going somewhere far away. And now she had arrived there. But she was no longer just a gypsy in front of an audience. She was a woman who knew that, despite all the changes, true freedom lay in being able to choose, being able to create her own path. And that evening, in the midst of luxury, Zarinca knew that, regardless of where she was, her true power remained in her choices. Zarinca sat on the terrace of her house, looking at Paris at night. The city was illuminated by thousands of lights that twinkled like stars on the ground, and the wind blew gently, carrying with it the distant smell of the Seine River. In this silence, everything seemed perfect. The life she had built seemed to be everything she had ever wanted, but in her soul, a restlessness troubled her. There was an important decision waiting for her, a choice that could change her destiny forever. Mattei approached her, with a shy smile on his face, but his eyes were worried, and the last few days, several uncomfortable silences had appeared between them. Although they had a comfortable life now, although they were respected in their circles, Zarinca could not hide her restlessness. Although she wanted more than anything for everything to be perfect, she felt a sliver of emptiness in her heart. "What's wrong, Zarinca?" Mattei asked, sitting next to her on the bench, also looking at the city from the height of the Parisian streets. Zarinca looked up at him, suddenly feeling alien to everything that surrounded her. "I don't know. I feel like I've reached a place where I can't find my place anymore. We have everything we wanted, but I don't feel fulfilled. I can't feel fulfilled without making a choice that defines me." Mattei looked at her carefully, knowing that although their lives had changed radically, she was still facing an inner struggle. "What do you mean?" he asked, with a slight concern in his voice. Zarinca lowered her head and clasped her hands in her lap, as if she were looking for an answer there, deep in her soul. "I'm not just a girl who sings on stage or a woman who lives in a big house with a carriage at the door. In my soul, I know that I have to choose. I have to do something that gives me meaning. Maybe it is time to move on, to do something other than stay in this place, where everything is too comfortable." Mattei looked at her in silence, then took a moment before answering. He knew that for Zarinca, life had never been about simple comfort, but about the struggle to find her own way, her own freedom. "I know you're thinking about that choice, about what you want to do next. But don't forget that I also chose to be by your side. Together, we managed to get here. I would like you to choose, but don't forget me, Zarinca. I don't want to lose you." Zarinca looked at him with wide eyes, feeling his words like a deep pain in her chest. Something in his voice said that Mattei didn't just want a quiet life, he wanted them to be together, always, as two partners who shared the same dreams. "I will never lose you, Mattei," she replied, her voice trembling but determined. "But you have to understand that I can't stay here, In a place where I don't find meaning, I have to choose whether I want to get lost in comfort or if I want to pursue something greater. I dream of a life where I can make a difference, a life that defines me more than what I have become now. Matej studied her, his eyes betraying deep concern. He understood Zarinca's desires and needs, but he was also afraid that the choice she was making could lead her down paths that would separate them. And what do you want to do? How do you want to change your life, Zarinca? Zarinca was silent for a few moments, letting the question haunt her. What did she really want? What should she choose? She had lived so much. There had been so many moments when she had run away from her own desires in order to survive. But now, having everything she wanted, she felt caught between two worlds. Maybe I want to go somewhere where no one knows me, a place where I can start my life from scratch, to give my best. Maybe I want to dedicate myself to a cause, to help people, to change something. But I don't know where that place would be. Matej stood up and approached her, putting his hand on her shoulder.